Internet.
A stream online.
TNTRadio.live. Today's News Talk Radio. TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to TNT Today's News Talk. I'm Patrick Henningsen Show. Thank you for rejoining us on this live broadcast. And as we were talking about the various political fallouts directly connected to the White House, to American government, British government, European government's support of Israel and what's happening and what they're doing in Gaza, it's very real. And it's going to manifest itself in elections coming up during this current cycle this year and next. I want to talk about this and more, plus a lot of other extenuating issues with our next guest, independent journalist based in Washington, D.C. Sam Husseini is joining us on the line right now. Sam, how are you?
I'm okay. Thank you, Patrick.
It's great to see you, Sam. And you had a very powerful, I think, segment last week with Basil Valentine on this issue of Aaron Bushnell and the self-immolation and the different examples of this and what it signifies. And these cases are fascinating, to say the least, in the kind of the political scope that they exist in. And you also brought us on the backline attention to one of these cases in Atlanta is also very interesting. I'd like to talk to you about that case, but also we've got other issues, Nicaragua, Germany, also coming up in the news as well. But go ahead, Sam.
Sure. The case in Atlanta. There's been a long history of these immolations happening in the United States. There were at least 4 or 5 regarding the Iraq War, and they got totally ignored. So all of the stories that you're seeing now in places like The Guardian and places like that, they'll give a quote unquote hit, and even in lefty circles, they'll give sort of a quote unquote history of self-immolations, but they only talk about the Vietnam cases, and then they talk about Bushnell, and they gloss over many cases regarding the Iraq War. What I dug into recently, though, was a case in Atlanta on December 1st. Someone immolated themselves in front of the Israeli consulate with a Palestinian flag. And there was some reporting about this, and the reporting was demented. The Israelis put out a statement calling it basically a hate crime. This person lit themselves on fire, and they're pretending that this is an act of anti-Semitism against them while they're slaughtering people. And you even had the police in Atlanta and so on talk about, the building is safe, as if that's the concern here. So I did some digging, and after a lot of prodding to the police and to the fire department in Atlanta, I got confirmation that the person is still alive. They're in Grady Hospital. They are 27 years old, but they couldn't. The hospital wouldn't return repeated phone calls, and the Atlanta Fire Department refuses to apparently abide by Georgia law, which mandates that within 3 days, they hand over documents in a case like this because they're claiming that it's still an open investigation. I suspect that they're doing that because they don't want to fork over the name, and that they're keeping the investigation open so that they can not fork over the name. So this person is lying in a hospital, but they're described as being in stable condition, but that could mean that they're in a coma. I simply don't know. It's just remarkable that somebody in a media center like Atlanta, the headquarters of CNN, could have immolated themselves in front of the Israeli embassy, and it garnered so little attention. The only reason that Bushnell, having followed several of these cases and looked into them, the only reason that he's gotten substantial attention is because he live streamed it. If it's not live streamed, then it gets totally ignored. This whole, media school of, sensationalism is what gets attention. If it bleeds, it leads, all of this stuff. It's all bunk. If it isn't conducive to the dominant narrative, then it gets ignored.
Yeah, and it is extraordinary that somebody who would engage in this type of self-sacrifice of political protest would then be, cast in a media narrative by any journalist or any outlet as, hateful or anti-Semitic. That alone, to me, is just shocking beyond belief,
Yeah.
Sam, that that's actually happening. And it really just speaks to, I don't know, there's just a level of callousness, I guess, by people in the media or politically. But that's that's one of the things I really have a hard time getting over that initial obstacle on stories like this. Rather than, and you pointed this out, how different cases of things like self-immolation are regarded totally differently in different political situations around the world. It is just extraordinary.
Yes, that's true. So people have noted that there have been cases of self-immolation in Russia, for example, and they get play in the United States. Of course, the Arab uprisings were largely sparked by self-immolation in Tunisia, and then there were several others in other Arabic countries. People obviously
Hmm.
sacrificing themselves in the hope that that would open the door and wake people up, as Buddhist monks have put it, that that's what self-immolation is designed to do. It's supposed to wake everybody else up to the reality and to the horrors of the reality so that they would be propelled to action. That's clearly the point. Several people have argued against calling this a form of suicide because it's not out of a personal despair. It's out of a hope of opening the door for a better life for other people.
Yeah. No, well, I mean, what it really says a lot about society, I think, in how society or the media organs or the political bodies and representatives and so forth, how they're reacting to these types of acts of self-sacrifice or of dissent, or as you said, trying to somehow stop a genocide in this case. It really says a lot about the state of society and how it's reacting to these, how it's characterizing these things, and not considering the general reaction to what's happened in Gaza, at least outside of the activist community. It's absolutely incredible. But yeah, go ahead, Sam, on this story, and then also I want to get your thoughts on Nicaragua and Germany creeping into the headlines as well. But go ahead, Sam.
Sure. I also wanted to say, Patrick, because it's more current right now. I don't know if maybe stop me if other shows have gone into this already, but Vice President Kamala Harris had a big soundbite yesterday that's dominating a lot of the news, where the Biden administration is again portraying itself as being pro ceasefire. It's not. She, muffled added, for 6 weeks. So what they're talking about is pausing the bombing for 6 weeks, at which time Hamas and other Palestinian groups hand over all of the Israeli captives, basically the only leverage they have. And then Israel will resume its slaughter. And that's not a ceasefire, as many people have noted. That's a pause in genocide. So it's also notable that, the timing of these things. Biden made his remarks referring to a alleged ceasefire while licking an ice cream cone just before the Michigan primary, because they were trying to do this uncommitted vote. And there's some fear that you could have a repeat of that tomorrow on Super Tuesday. And so it seems calculated that they put Kamala Harris, African American, to put out this line just before that vote in order to portray themselves to Democratic voters as really honestly trying to push Israel to do a ceasefire, when the actual evidence of actual actions and arming Israel in diplomatic cover, repeated vetoes and stopping moves at the United Nations and so on show a clear pattern of the Biden-Harris administration backing Israel tremendously.
No, the numbers on this, Sam, are undeniable. Like looking at the latest Wall Street Journal poll on this, 60% of American voters are, quote, unhappy with President Biden's handling of the Israel-Palestinian conflict right now. That's a new survey. Numbers have just come out. Those are trending upward, by the way, looking at the data from previous polls. So, like, it's kind of, Sam, this totally belies the normal trends, which is that America gets fatigue on an issue and it sort of peters out or it tapers off, especially if it's not something the U.S. is directly involved in. But this one's going in the other direction, Sam. It's like the angst is increasing across the American electorate spectrum on this. I mean, this is kind of quite an amazing thing to witness. And I think it really speaks to a very deep level of corruption that people are sensing with the U.S. government on this. And it's just completely unflagging support of Israel. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary to see numbers like this, Sam.
Yeah. And, I mean, a case can be made that the U.S. is directly involved in this. The support has been so overwhelming. And there have been some reports, unconfirmed, perhaps even relating to Aaron Bushnell, because he talks about complicity. And so a lot of people are investigating to what extent that there are U.S. special forces involved in this. I've seen reports along those lines. I'd like to emphasize I have not seen confirmation of them. But beyond the arming and the political support and the economic support and so on, there could be even direct and there is a direct military, because you had Biden immediately send a carrier group to the Eastern Mediterranean right after in October, and of course, in terms of Yemen, now you have the U.S. In direct bombing Yemen, because Yemeni forces had been attacking ships related to Israel as a way of pressuring Israel to stop its genocide. And so you had Biden attacking Yemen in contravention of the War Powers clause of the Constitution, not going before Congress. And many Congress people noted that this was in contravention of the Constitution, but none of them have the gumption to proceed to impeachment, which is the proper legal remedy for that. But you have this state of this is an extreme case, but it's a recurring case of how the U.S. public fundamentally is disenfranchised. Because, if you have Biden, Harris supporting Israel's genocide, and you have most of the Republicans, of course, supporting Israel's genocide. So where do they go? There was no, challenger to Biden, substantial challenger to Biden in the primaries. So you have this vote for uncommitted. I've long advocated a unity of the left and right. Imagine, if the Green Party and Libertarian parties wanted to actually win rather than merely dissent, they could combine their forces and draw support from either side, from the left and the right, eliminating the spoiler argument, which is a main tool of the U.S. establishment in stifling third-party runs. You're just a spoiler. You're taking a vote away from Biden, and therefore you're helping elect Trump. This is the, mantra over and over and over again. And what I say with a webpage that I've launched called Vote Pact is that people from the left and the right can team up and vote in pairs for anti-establishment candidates. They could vote for different candidates. Ideally, if you had a candidate that could appeal to both the left and the right, who would be pro civil liberties, who would be anti-war, who would be pro Main Street and anti-Wall Street, who would be against big tech censorship. I think that there is a radical center in the United States. And actually, with George Galloway winning in Britain, I think that there's a similar dynamic there, where you have a, sort of a populist, anti-war candidate who can actually lay it on the line directly, that could have mass appeal. But I'm not sure that the political structure in the United States are ready for that. I think the people are hungry for something like that. I'm sorry. The other thing that we wanted to talk about was the Nicaragua case against Germany. Now, of course, South Africa put forward their genocide case against Israel, and the International Court of Justice gave orders to Israel, which they've clearly violated, to stop all genocidal acts. And that case is proceeding. Nicaragua filed a declaration of intervention in that case. Lots of other countries should do that. You had like 30 countries applaud South Africa, but only Nicaragua so far has actually filed a declaration with the court saying we're backing South Africa up here. Jordan said it would, it hasn't. Bangladesh said it would, it hasn't. You've had people like Lula, get tons of publicity online, at least, for statements calling Israel, out for its genocide, but he has not proceeded to do any legal action. Nicaragua, to their credit, has gone one step beyond, and they've filed a suit using the Genocide Convention targeting Germany for its tremendous support for Israel, for its cutting off support for UNRWA, which is one of the, basically the last major lifeline for the Palestinian people in terms of humanitarian relief. Calling it out, and we will likely see a hearing at the International Court of Justice on this. I would guess in about 2 weeks, you should see the International Court of Justice say, okay, we're ready to hear this case and have oral arguments. I have not, the filing that Nicaragua did is about 40 pages. I have to go through it in the next day or two, and possibly, write a piece about it. On first glance, it seems substantial. It's not maybe perhaps as robust as the South Africa case on Israel, which was quite massive. But of course, Germany isn't actually conducting the genocide. It's merely facilitating it. A lot of people have asked, why don't they go after the United States? The United States has a reservation on the clause in the Genocide Convention that says you can go to the International Court of Justice to adjudicate a violation of it. Basically saying we're above the law. We're not going to be ruled upon by the International Court of Justice on whether or not we are conducting or facilitating a genocide. Germany has no such reservation, which opens the door for Nicaragua to sue Germany effectively for genocide at the World Court.
Sam, just give us your prognosis on the goings on right now, legal happenings in the ICJ with this. It's extraordinary that you have these smaller countries challenging some of these world superpowers like Germany on this very basic, fundamental moral issue. Sammy, that's extraordinary story in itself. But where do you think this is going to take us with the United for Peace resolution? What are the odds of this UN General Assembly in the next couple minutes? Go ahead, Sam.
Sure. I think what Nicaragua has done in terms of going, after Germany is very skillful, because even though the United States ignores things like the International Court of Justice, I think it's more difficult for the Europeans to do so. They have this pretense of, abiding by international law and caring about international law and so on. So it'll be fascinating to see how that pans out. Of course, the U.S. has repeatedly vetoed anything at the UN Security Council to address Israel's slaughter. And what needs to happen is that under Uniting for Peace, the General Assembly needs to start asserting its power. It can suspend Israel as a member of the General Assembly. It can admit Palestine as a member of the General Assembly. It can recommend that countries cut off diplomatic relations with Israel. It can recommend sanctions, economic sanctions against Israel. It can potentially set up a tribunal to target individual Israelis, because the International Criminal Court, which is supposed to do that kind of thing, hasn't done its job. In the past, the Security Council set up these tribunals in the case of Rwanda and in the case of Yugoslavia. But many people have argued that the General Assembly could do likewise, could set up a tribunal to go after individual Israelis, like Netanyahu, like his war cabinet, and potentially even people in other countries who are facilitating Israel's genocide. So there are a whole series of things that could and should be done in the General Assembly. The Arab League, the Arab group at the at the UN, and others have been threatening to do so, but so far they haven't followed up. So you have this phenomena of civil society, of groups of activists online pushing these countries to fess up and live up to their rhetoric. They're calling what Israel is doing a genocide, but they're not acting like it. I kind of respect the United States in a way, because, the U.S. wouldn't call Rwanda a genocide, because if it did, then it would have to act. But here you have these countries, including substantial countries like Brazil, saying, Israel is committing genocide here. Well, Brazil and all of these other countries, third world countries, emerging powers, and so on, need to act on their words and need to issue declarations with the International Criminal Court, as Nicaragua has done, need to pursue other cases. Britain is also vulnerable on this. Australia potentially is vulnerable on this. And move on all legal fronts, whether at the International Criminal Court, whether at the United Nations itself.
It's going to be very interesting to see how this does develop in the coming weeks and months. Sam Husseini, Washington, D.C. based journalist. We really appreciate your analysis on this at TNT. Thank you, Sammy, for joining us this week.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Patrick.
There he goes. There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. And follow Sam Husseini on Substack. Do subscribe to his work, and on X, Twitter. We'll drop his links in the TNT chat community. He's doing fantastic work. You want to be following and supporting independent journalists like Sam. Let's take a break right now with TNT and try to connect our next guest on the other side.
Internet. A stream online.
TNT Radio.live. Today's News Talk Radio. TNT.